Welcome back to our panel discussion hosted by General Dynamics Information Technology on government cloud brokerage. Who, what, when, where, and why on Federal News Radio. And the cloud brokerage concept is what we're talking about today with Stan Kaczmarzyk of the General Services Administration, Keith Trippi of DHS, Peter Brandano of General Dynamics Information Technology, and Maria Rote of the General Services Administration. We talked about the concept of who's responsible for what, and Keith, I framed it to you as who do you yell at when there's a problem. And that really is the sticking point here, it seems, because the responsibility, as you talked about, does lie with a couple of different people. How did you navigate through that piece of it when you went back to the business case scenario and you were moving this up the chain and saying, yeah, this is okay, we can live with doing it this way?
Well, let me give you two scenarios. One, I'll use our public cloud and our partnership with GSA's contract. We bought infrastructure as a service, and we have our public web cloud. So if folks have gone to FEMA.gov, TSA.gov, DHS.gov, and others, that is all on that platform. We bought infrastructure as a service, and we added our own services on top of that to build out what the websites look like. Two different vendors that are involved in that. Not atypical of what happens in other government agencies. We have, service has been pretty good overall with both providers, but we have had some issues. And when those issues come up, it's a very standard sort of incident response process. If anybody is working on ITIL, it's pretty familiar with that framework. The right folks are getting on the conversation to manage the incident, manage the problem, resolve, and get it to, well, what happened, right? So it's not who shot JR while it's happening. You get it up, you get it resolved, you do a root cause analysis, and then you come back and make sure that those changes are done. And there may be changes that are done at both providers. It may only be one provider once you figure out what the issue is. That's out in, say, the public cloud. There are other services that are where we go all the way up to software as a service, maybe in our private cloud. We've got a couple of those, whether it's email or collaboration or CRM. If there's an issue in that environment and there's not another vendor involved, similar sort of ITIL processes associated with troubleshooting what the issue is, but it's only with one vendor. It happens to be a cloud provider, but a private cloud provider providing a particular service. If folks have built applications on that platform, revert back to what I talked about in the public cloud, following ITIL and good best practices on incident and problem resolve. It's very similar. It's not that drastically different from what we were doing in the old business model. I think the difference here is the higher up we go in the stack, then we're dealing with less vendors. We're dealing with maybe a vendor. And then I think the other component of this in longer term, we don't have to solve this here, is the transport mechanism. Because I've yet to meet one customer that's on the end of the device that cares that where the air conditioning is blowing, where the data is sitting, is at 4 nines or high availability. If the service isn't good where they are, they're not having a good user experience. So I think the larger discussion over time is going to be, how do you get end-to-end SLAs from the compute through the transport to the endpoint device, which, by the way, I've got these devices, they're all moving now, right? Yeah. It's not just a 21-inch screen. So all of those things, I think, in context have got to be very thoughtfully done over the next few years.
So, Peter, when Keith talks about some of the things that he just mentioned, the issue then, it sounds to me, becomes mental, cultural. If the business model is just a little different, but the old business model, then the holdup seems to be in the mind of the person who's the decision maker rather than in the technology or the way that it's being deployed. Am I on target there?
Absolutely. I think cloud, unfortunately, has become almost a 4-letter word. It's so worn out. And I think that, when you start to talk about cloud, people lose sight of the fact that we're talking about IT. We're really talking about IT services and being able to consume them more practically. And that's the bottom line. So I think, what Keith was describing is the way we see it also. I mean, down the road, as I mentioned earlier, it's very difficult to marry a lot of these cloud services to the government requirements. The terms and conditions just don't work. They have, in a lot of cases, the clout to be able to say no to certain SLAs. That's where, someone like a cloud broker comes in to say, okay, I'm going to integrate these various services together, and by doing this, and by building in high availability and so forth, I'm going to bring you a level of service that the individual providers aren't willing to commit to. So obviously we're taking on risk by doing that, but I think that's an important mediation that has to happen to be able to make cloud practical, really, for the government.
Now, it strikes me, Maria, that one risk that Peter or his colleagues don't have to take is security, because if all of these vendors that he's working with have been through your program, the end user, the customer, is clear on that, right?
Okay, somewhat.
So are
I'll
there?
say somewhat.
So are there? Should I look at security differently through a brokerage program than I would if I just were coming to a vendor who's been through FedRAMP on a one-on-one basis?
Yeah, so we've had a number of conversations as we've looked at the cloud broker model, what that looks like, what it could potentially be, how big, how broad, like Pete's talking about, And from the security perspective, when a cloud service provider gets their provisional authorization through the Joint Authorization Board, or an agency issues that authorization, there is still ongoing continuous monitoring requirements. So there's monthly reporting, quarterly, POAMs, annual testing, all of that still has to happen. So all of that continuous monitoring continues to take place. So how is that reporting come in? Right now, all of that's coming in through my office, certainly for all those cloud providers that have gotten their provisional ATO through the Joint Authorization Board. So all that, and we monitor that. So we're looking at trending, we're looking at that long term. Now, how the cloud broker is going to play into that, is the cloud service provider even going to share that information with the broker? That's something that I think is still open. How is that information going to come in? I think there's a lot of advantages on the reporting side potentially for that. But right now, the cloud providers may say, I'm not going to share that with the broker. I may or may not. It depends on the relationship and the contract with that. But right now, I have a responsibility with the close cloud providers to receive all that data, to look at it, to make sure they're maintaining their security posture. Because, the cloud service provider doesn't want to be in a position that they've got 100 customers, 50 customers, and then all of a sudden they're not meeting the mark on continuous monitoring. They've got, high vulnerabilities. They're not doing their patching. The things aren't happening. And all of a sudden their provisional ATO gets pulled. People need to get notified. So, the role of the cloud broker in that security, I think that it still to be determined, and some of that depends on the relationship between that broker and those cloud providers that they're working with. I know I continue to have that responsibility for continuous monitoring, and the cloud providers they have to, and they're required to send that to me so that I can, ensure that they're maintaining their security posture.
Pete?
It's interesting. We, as a large systems integrator, do a lot of legacy, data center consolidation work and that sort of thing. And we recently built out a data center for the Marine Corps and went through DIACAP accreditation, which is similar to FedRAMP. I see it as, a parallel in that role, we were responsible for making sure that all of the technology in the data center, servers, compute, storage, networking, and so forth, were able to, continuously meet the STIG requirements and meet continuous monitoring. So I see this as sort of an evolution of that role where we would basically be accountable for making sure that a cloud service provider is meeting their requirements up to their layer of the stack. But if we're, say integrating applications or building something that's highly available, then it would be up to us to make sure the overall enterprise solution was meeting the requirements. So I think there'd be probably multiple layers of reporting, and we'd have to manage that.
Keith?
So, we kind of wear two hats, or, the Homeland Security, we have a mission around cyber, but I'm going to kind of talk to it about from a consumer sort of perspective. We are going to be pushing very hard for more transparency on the security side. So the threats are always maturing, right? So they're not just sitting there waiting for us to get ahead of everything. They're going to be maturing, and because of that, we want more real-time information around cyber. So we're going to be pushing our friends in industry for better transparency, the concept around count everything, and we'll figure out how we want the data to us. That data should roll up from the providers through the broker, maybe through other mechanisms, but that plate of glass for corporate CIOs or agency or bureau CIOs, that's what we're looking for. And we're going to continue to push industry, and if industry takes an approach where they go after that and they want that business, well, there's some things they're going to have to do building off of what we're doing with CDM within the department in the federal space, working with Maria and the folks at GSA on FedRAMP, NTIPS, TIC 2.0. All of that, ecosystem is maturing, so that means more information for us to feel more comfortable that we're actively managing the risk, and that's what this is. These are risk-based decisions against that. So we'll continue to put the pressure on our friends over in industry to make sure that the cyber posture is what we need it to be, and the more transparency we have, the more trust that we'd be able to extend, and that gets at the culture.
Stan?
Yeah, Maria mentioned what a good job the cloud service providers are doing on security now, but my office did the authorization and accreditation work with them before FedRAMP was stood up, and many of those companies had not dealt with the federal government before, so there was a pretty steep learning curve with FISMA, but they've climbed the curve now, so I think we need to take advantage of that.
Well, and that actually touches on something, Stan, I wanted to mention with either you or Keith, and that is we're in a transitional time now where Congress is looking at a number of different possibilities for how you transition away from FISMA to the continuous monitoring and CDM model that Maria talked about earlier. And so, Pete, you're finding, I imagine, that you've got to figure out a way to anticipate what's going to happen, even though you don't know yet, to be able to provide that service the minute that the agencies have to meet with it. So what kind of a role do you find yourself in that situation that you're going to be able to address what Keith and his colleagues at other agencies want when Congress tells them they have to do something different rather than just meet the FISMA guidelines?
Well, our goal is to continuously add services to our catalog. So, so FedRAMP accredited services, like Autonomic and others, would be added to our catalog to be able to react quickly, to be able to offer that as part of the buffet table. Ourselves, we have a FISMA moderate data center, and we're currently working through FedRAMP. So until the point where we can offer it ourselves, and even after that point, we're still going to offer FedRAMP services from all of the providers, and allow them to raise the bar really and become an interesting product for our customers.
Stan, I want to get back to something you mentioned a moment ago, and that is the concept of figuring out what works for the agencies. And you've talked about the pilot project that you're working on. Keith's one of the people involved with that. Tell me a little bit about that framework and what you're providing to agencies who are getting involved with that as kind of a way to dip the toe in the water, so to speak.
Sure. We're currently engaged in a pilot project. We call it proof of concept around a cloud broker platform. We're testing various software packages that provide cloud broker services, basically the provisioning and the management of cloud services. And DHS and HHS are our two customers. The contract we have for that runs through the end of March, but we should be in a position by mid-February to evaluate the results of it and see what we're going to do going forward. I know we're going to go forward with DHS and HHS because they have real needs if we want to provide for those needs. I don't know yet whether or not we're going to have a government-wide offering around Cloud Broker, but we are learning a lot about Cloud Brokers. We're going to be helping DHS and HHS obtain those services. Other agencies that we worked with earlier in the process have gone out on their own and obtained Cloud Broker services. That's great. If they use GSA contracts, that's even better. But, we're all learning together.
But you make a point there that I think is interesting about this pilot program, which is this is not just a pilot program for the sake of testing this way to do it. You're helping these agencies, DHS and HHS, obtain services that they need just in a different way. And that kind of fits, it seems to me, with what Keith was talking about the business model. This is not something you're just trying out for the fun of it to see if it works.
Yeah, and if it ends with DHS and HHS and their needs are satisfied, great.
What is the potential scope of it, though? I mean, is this something that you expect to see at some point would be available to everybody across the government?
Certainly the lessons learned and the best practices. As I said before, I don't anticipate standing up a boutique contract for cloud brokers. You can obtain any of those services through our existing vehicles. We'll work hard to provide templates for agencies to acquire services and help them use our contracts, or even stand up their own. If they want to use our platform, they can do that too. The thing about the cloud broker is, there was some discussion about, we're going to have a BPA for cloud brokers and to compete against each other and to compete the CSP services and drive the prices down, and there was some concern about all that. But an agency doesn't want to bid task orders and get a new broker every time they need work done. Okay, an agency wants to work consistently with one broker, one integrator, and so a contract for brokers, to me, right now, doesn't seem to be a viable option.
Pete, we just have a couple minutes left in this part of the conversation, but it seems to me what I'm hearing, especially Keith and Stan say, is this should be seamless even at the Keith Trippi level. It should be a provision of services. It shouldn't. We should make it too complicated. How do you do the complicated part on your back end so that when you come to the customer, it is seamless the way that Keith wants it to be and the way that Stan wants it to be for his customers?
It's a great question. Today a lot of the cloud brokerages are born out of infrastructure as a service. So you see, basically selling computers, right? It's like selling co-location. Well, the way we see it going is pre-integrating solutions that are popular amongst our existing customer base and things that we're hearing demand for, in addition to those traditional services. So selling everything at every layer. So infrastructure as a service, and then up to platform and software, but then also pre-integrated solutions such as a SharePoint instance for possibly across multiple clouds for high availability. Where we've already, ensured that we're using FedRAMP data center providers, and we're using software that's gone through JITC or whatever might be required by that particular customer. So then we can offer that on the catalog to say, if you want this, basically pre-architected solution, you can buy it in a click. But if you want to build it yourself because you know how, then that's an option too. And our goal is to really make a simple user interface that we can, quickly give those options to our customers.
You're listening to the General Dynamics Information Technology panel on government cloud brokerage. Who, what, when, where, why on Federal News Radio. We'll be right back.